Hello everyone, and welcome to my first introductory tutorial to CSS. This will be for basic beginners starting off at the very beginning. We're going to go over just a few simple things in this video, which will be the selectors and specificity and how all that works in CSS, and how we can style HTML elements. So CSS is Cascading Style Sheets, and it's a way for us, like I said, to style our web pages by selecting HTML elements and giving them different attributes of style. There's a few different ways that we can select things in CSS, and we're going to basically go from a top-down approach. With each of these different types of selectors, they hold what's called specificity. And with specificity in CSS, that means the more specific something is, the more priority it has over other stylings. So that's one of the two major things to remember with CSS, is that specificity will determine what is rendered to the screen if there's conflicting styles, as well as the cascading part of CSS is that the file is read from top down. So if the specificity is the same, the one lower on the page will be the one that's rendered. So starting at the very top, we have an asterisk, which represents the universal selector. This will select absolutely everything, and oftentimes this is used to set up your base CSS styles for the project you're working on. A lot of times, personally, this is where I'll use my CSS reset, so that way all my stylings will be 100% mine. But to show this, we're gonna just bump up the font size here so you all can see the box is a little bit bigger there. So as we can see, and like I said, this is at the top. This is universal. This is everything. It's the least specific we can get here. If we change the background color to, let's not do red, we'll do blue, you'll see that the entire page becomes blue in the background. Now I think I can inspect here in CodePen. If I can, yes. So you see each one of these divs, which comes up here from our HTML. This whole box, if the background was something else, the div here would also have a blue background, but since it's the same color, all these elements have the same background. So we're just going to take that off, and we're going to move down the list to element selectors. And this is where we select things from the HTML document by their HTML tag. So we have our HTML selector, and what we can do here is we can do font weight, bold, and as you can see, since all the divs are part of the HTML document, they are bolded out. Then we can go through and just select the div and say color red. So anything that's a div up here will render the color red. So if we change this real quick to a paragraph. Okay, bad example. Because the paragraph here is inside this div, it inherits the red property. But if we bring it out and it's no longer wrapped in a div here, well, there we go, you can see that it loses that red property. But then we can also select P for paragraph element, and we can say color blue. So that's the basics of HTML selectors. This will work for anything. We've got HTML, body, divs, sections, paragraphs, anchors, images. You get the idea here. Oops. Is it control? There we go. I'll go ahead, because I will have this CodePen linked in the description of the video. So I'm going to leave these comments in here. moving down the line, next we would have class selectors. Oops, there we go. And as you can see here on this div, we have the class of red, and on the P we have a class of blue. So to access those, you just put a dot and then the class name, so red. And we can say background color red. And to show that this isn't a similar situation as earlier, put you back in there, and you can see that it does not get the red background because it's not part of this class. But we've also, where this is lower, remember the cascading, it holds onto this blue instead of inheriting the red from the div. So we could do blue, and we could say, might change these to border and pixel solid blue. Okay. So those are our class selectors, and that's just how all of them will work. You'll just put a dot, and then you'll put the class name here. And that's how you will select classes. So classes override elements. Elements can override universal. Let's demonstrate that a little bit. We're going to switch it up. We're going to say blue. We're going to say red. So now you can see that the class has, it's where it's more specific, it holds on to that. But if we duplicate this here, but remove the class names, you can see how they revert back to these stylings. So underneath class selectors, we have ID. And I will actually change this class right here to an ID. Oh, we're going to get rid of that. Put that about there. To access an ID selector, we just put the pound sign and then the name of the ID. Actually, I just realized I could do this a better way, just to show you the specificity a little bit better. Actually, yeah, I didn't need that. Take you, say ID equals green, and then I'll comment this out for right now so we don't have too much clutter on the screen. Okay, so we can say green, and then we can override everything about those other styles. Now the tricky thing to remember about ID is that there can only be one ID with the same name. There we go, that's a better way of wording it. So I couldn't put ID green on anything else. It would throw an error. And like I said, this is very much specificity and not cascading, because if we put this up here, you can see that it actually maintains its stylings. But I'm going to keep these in a cascading order, so that way it just makes sense that this is least specific working down to most specific. Now then, after ID, the next specific thing would be an embedded style sheet. So for that, let's see how I can do this. Yeah, right here. Well, get this out of the way for a minute. So what we can do is add a style tag to our HTML document, and this is treated embedded instead of being externally linked. So we could do dot blue. No, that one's been done for a minute. Let's do dot red. And then we can say color black, border none. And as you can see, this overrode everything we have down here in this sheet here. So even if we do something that's the most specific that we have so far, we could do background color black, color white. So that is embedded stylings. Now we'll make a note to see HTML doc above to find that style sheet. So next on our list for specificity is inline styling, which will be very similar. I'm actually just going to make this into one comment here, because this also goes in our HTML document. So as we start getting this specific, we mostly leave the CSS document. But what separates this is instead of the script tag here, we can go up here and I can go style equals color green. And you can see that that even overrode this down here. Bring that out a little bit. Space everything out so it's a little readable. And then for my own purposes, we're going to say box 3. Okay. Okay, and the final and most specific is going to be the important tag. And for this, we'll do something very not specific, like an element selector div. And then what we can do is say color, well, let's do background color, white, oops, one too many B's, and then color black. As you can see, this didn't change anything. Just add exclamation point, important here. See, not much has changed. That's because I forgot that we also have paragraph elements. And look at that, it has overridden everything. So this is the most specific. Now, a note I really want to make here is that you don't want to be overly specific, because that makes things harder to reuse in other places, as well as it's harder to fix if you're going through thousands of lines of CSS and you don't know exactly what you're looking for. So the below selectors of this line, I would say, are rare use only. And honestly, what I've always been advised and what I personally try to do is never use important. I haven't personally met anyone that is like this, but I've heard that this is a way for developers to basically put a band-aid on styling problems, as opposed to finding a better way to manage the CSS. That's obviously up for debate, but I could see in certain situations where people would use it in that way. So as you can see here, we've done something where we can change these together. If we have a comma, it sees them as two different elements. But if I take this comma out, basically what that means is any P within a div. So let me make a better example of this, because this is also a pretty important fact with specificity. So we're going to do an H1 with text, or text, and then we're going to do a div H1 text. So if we do H1 color blue again, we get both of them blue. But if we do div H1 color red, you can see that that bottom one changes. So chaining things together makes them more specific. So this is another thing to consider when going through specificity. is if you're only using one kind of selector, this top to bottom method is a great guide to follow. But things get a little trickier sometimes because you can chain parents to children here. Because I could even do something like, let me change this. I'm going to add another div. My emmet will work. There we go. And then we're going to do h1 text. Or actually, we're going to change this to section. Give this a class name. Oops, sorry. Went a little React there. Header. Okay. So what we can do with this is we can say section dot header h1. We can say color green. Font weight normal. And see how it just differentiates. This would be more specific than saying this. Oops, don't want to be in there. See how it only changed this one up here, because where it has the section, it's more specific as well as being below the cascade. But where this one includes a class instead of the element selector, it's even more specific, and that's why it dominates here. So with this is kind of the basics of different selectors and how they relate with specificity, and I hope this has been helpful and somehow you've got something out of this video. Thank you for watching. Leave a comment and subscribe if you want to keep following along as I put more of these out. And I will see you all in the next video.